That was one of his, it was one of his most, like, it was one of his fantasy. And having more time with him now, and for him seeing these plantings happening, like, it feels so good. And we're so grateful to have you as a partner in this project. And thank you, Jim, for making this happen and giving my old man the sense that he's leaving a legacy behind.
Well, I think what we want to try and get across here today is the idea that hedgerows are, as well as being wonderful habitats and really good at doing what they do, which is, as barriers in a landscape and on a farm, are really, really important to connect people and connect people to the landscape. So thanks, Jake. We'll have some questions for you in a little while. I just wanted to go straight on and see if we'll get the Steve. Are you there? Steve Gabriel?
Yeah. Hey, Jim.
Fantastic. I've just got to find you here and make you co-host as well. So Steve is coming from Wellspring Forest Farm, and I will let you do the intros there, Steve, but it's nice to have you. I'm glad you could make it. Okay. We're having a problem with the sound, so while you can present a video, it might work from your end, so let's see how it goes.
Yeah, I have a few clips I'll probably just talk over, because I always feel like it's a pain to try to make it all work.
It really is. Excellent. Over to you, mate.
Yeah, cool. Thanks everybody, and thanks, Jim, for asking me to come and speak a bit about the hedges as a piece of our kind of agroforestry project. So Wellspring Forest Farm is about 20 acres that we have title on, and then another 15 or 20 that we graze our neighbors kind of to the north of us here on this map. But mostly working with open pasture in those systems. And my background's in forestry, and got really interested in agroforestry along the way, and landed on this place in the world that has quite a bit of sort of abandoned farmland as its forest. It's not a particularly old or healthy forest. There's a lot of interesting little projects we're trying to think about how to do ecological healing while having a productive farm at the same time. And so that's like the lens we try to push everything through. Calling ourselves a forest farm to us means wanting to see a forest, a healthy forest, left in our footsteps as we depart the land one way or the other one of these days. Versus when we found this land, it was clearly pretty degraded, pretty beat up. Small rain events, the water would pool in the pastures and in the forests. Species were struggling. Nutrient composition is still low. Organic matter was low. All these kind of indicators of ecological health. So thinking about the forest as a template, because that's really what wants to sort of grow in this part of the world, in central New York, is kind of our template. So we do a lot of different things. And a big unifying element for us on this landscape to do the restoration work has been bringing animals into the system. So for us, the livestock, which right now is pastured ducks that we raise for eggs. We do a small amount of pastured chicken just for sort of friends and family and our own consumption. And then the sheep, I'd say in the farm scheme of things, they're more break-even enterprises in the sense they pay for themselves, they pay for the time. But livestock enterprises are notoriously sort of small in terms of their margins. So for us, other items that are higher margin, like mushroom production, agritourism, education, those kind of things have another role to play in the farm. But the animals are really the participants in this whole farm who can do the most impact on all the acreage. So we're really constantly moving them around and having them interact with the landscape. So I preface all that because hedgerows and animals are something I'm really interested in exploring, and I think is some of the original intention. Essentially seeking vegetation in the landscape and how to put it to good use when managing livestock is one of the roots, I think, of this practice. So just a couple of things. Like for me, I was just curious always about hedge laying, had mostly seen pictures, but never experienced what it was like. And I think that's a really key piece is the workshop we ended up doing, and the participation was I think really just nourishing and rich for everyone involved. And it was partially just the experience of swinging a billhook and cleaving vegetation and laying it down and sort of having that hands-on experience. There's really no way that pictures or video can fully capture that. But I took a class, I was in England in February of 2019, and at an agriculture conference there, and just happened to look around for something fun to do on the weekend, which turned out to be there happened to be a hedge laying class within a reasonable bit of travel. So did a class, really was bit by the bug, so to speak, and then coming home thinking about, is this something we could actually create on our landscape? And that's where I connected with Jim and Nigel and wrestled them over to the farm, where I think we could safely say there was a bit of panic, because the density of vegetation is certainly a take-home lesson. And the existing edges of our forest, some of the existing areas didn't have a ton of material that was dense enough to really lay efficiently. So we had to walk around the farm quite a bit and try to kind of find some suitable spaces. We found 3 areas to play with, and 2 of them were along sort of edges that had been neglected and ignored and not managed. The one here is you can see the blue tubing in the back. That's our sugar bush where we produce maple syrup, and that was an area that had enough density with a couple additional. I believe we stuck in some willow stakes to help round out the the hedge here. And so we found a couple of spots like that, but we also perhaps have one of the few. This is this is along the back edge here. This is mostly buckthorn. I should say this one is quite a mix of things, but mostly more like your common Northeast US sort of deciduous trees like maple and ash and cherry and things like that. We had this kind of buckthorn vegetation in the back that we worked with. Here's the finished hedge there, the maple woods, after it was all done. And I have to say, the sugar maple actually creates quite a nice display of color in the fall. I was really pleased to see this. This hedge has really, we have an agritourism, we rent a yurt in the summer, and it really is an aesthetic feature. It doesn't have like a livestock or sort of other functionality, but it really is aesthetically pleasing, really beautiful to see, and also kind of hides some of the farm underbelly behind it, which is some of the messy parts of the farm from our guests. But with that beautiful foliage in the fall from the sugar maples, I think it really makes for a unique look there. This I think was the most interesting one, in the sense that I think both Jim and Nigel were scratching their heads a bit and saying, yeah, I guess we can try this kind of odd species as willow. We had planted 300 feet of swale in a purple osier hybrid willow, mainly for a windbreak, was the goal. Very windy site that we have, but it's actually become more important as fodder for the sheep, as we learned over time during drought conditions, and just as kind of a regular food source for them. The tannins in the willow really offer the sheep a lot of health benefits. So we've been routinely browsing these windbreaks and allowing the sheep to have some access while making sure the trees are still growing. And so there was enough dense vegetation here that we thought it would be worth a try to do the willow hedge. So this was, again, November 2019 that we did the class, and worked with the willow, which was tricky in some ways, because there were lots of little sort of shoots coming off of one major base. We had planted this hedge with single willow stakes, generally about like thumbs diameter. And we had planted that, I should say, in 2014. So here we are 5 years later, with the vegetation essentially at start being about 8 to 10 feet high, and then we're cleaving it down and using that material in the fence. And I was really curious to see what it looked like in the coming years, and I'll share just like a drive-by on the tractor. This is this year. And it's incredibly thick. And what's really interesting is the regrowth on this is so much better than if we just left this willow as a browse feature for the animals. The vigorous sort of regrowth from the hedge lane has really probably doubled the biomass on the hedge itself, and it's already above browse height, so more than half of it is above where the sheep can reach. And the benefit of that is we can have them go at the fence and nibble a bit, and then still have plenty of vegetation to continue to support the live material to grow. And it'll probably need to be laid sooner than we even thought. I mean, it's growing just incredibly well. And it's definitely an impenetrable fence. So this year was the first year that we didn't set up net fencing around it and worried about it. We just let it be, and the animals interacted. I should say we move our animals every day. So if we left them exposed to the fence for 3 to 5 to 7 days, we might have some impact that could really be negative. But in our rotation system, it definitely works for that. It's sort of a fence and a buffet all at once for them. And because of the tannins in the willow, it also limits what the sheep will take in. So they'll only eat so much of it because they can only handle so much in their sort of palate. So that was it's really cool to see. And I guess for me, the potential to plant willow is really important, and if a hedge can be built out of it, the real advantages are we could be seeing hedges established in under 5 years in this climate that could be laid and start to create fencing and replace some of the mobile or otherwise fence costs that's associated with it, and also be a sort of fodder source for the animals. And research has shown that the tannins will help both with sort of reducing parasite loads in the animals, as well as reducing the methane that they let out. So really good for them, and I think a multifunctional thing, and then something very easy to establish. So I love trees that you can stick a stick in the ground and they'll sprout and start growing. And so willow offers us one of those great options to do that. And yeah, so that's where one piece of this sort of hedge experience fits in. I think on the sort of I mentioned already that this one feels like a bit of a sort of aesthetic and sort of privacy hedge, which is really beneficial for our guests, and sort of creating a bit of separation between the farm activities, which can be a bit messy, and sort of the recreational activities we want to support for folks who come to visit and stay there. But I think that the one in the back is the one that actually Jim and Nigel are on the hook to come back for, at least Jim, since he's close. But this one, I lost the picture here, is the buckthorn hedge. And buckthorn is something that we've done a lot of research with from a fodder perspective, because it's so persistent in our farm landscape. And it's considered an invasive here in North America. I'm certainly not saying that folks should plant it, but it's very persistent. It's from a fodder perspective very good. I lost the photo, it doesn't matter. Sort of very good at resprout, we're finding after a browse event, or even cutting it, whether it's pollarding or coppicing it. It holds green vegetation very late in the season. It has a relatively high protein content and quite a bit of trace mineral content. So again, another kind of fodder shrub, and responding very, very well. I didn't get a good picture before the presentation, but similar to the willow, just explosive growth coming off of that hedge, and good opportunities there to have the sheep potentially interact. And that one is actually a border hedge along our property line. So if we extend that, we did about half of what is available there. If we could continue to extend it, then it would be wonderful if eventually we didn't have to put any perimeter fence up on that edge of the property as well. So that kind of gives you an oversight. I think there was a bit of circumstance for where the hedges ended up because of the density of the vegetation. But I think what was really great is we have kind of some functionality, some aesthetic value. And again, I think one of our goals as a farm is really the education. And so the experience of having folks come and learn this craft and get their hands into it was really strong, and a very powerful experience for me. And I hope we can continue to do it. We'll have to plant more in order to prep for that, but it was a good start. I think I'll stop there for now.
Wonderful. Thanks, Steve. It's a really great presentation, and really, excuse me, really gives you a kind of oversight into what we did down there in Wellspring Forest Farm, and you know, the willow that's coming back. So pleased to see that that the hedgerows are responding really well, and it does give you a sense of the multifunctionality of hedgerows as well. You know, from the silver pasture applications to something a little bit more kind of again aesthetic, as you say. I'm not sure whether I do have the picture of the other hedge, but no worries. And one of the things that I'm really interested in exploring, and perhaps maybe we can explore more in the questions as we go forward, is this idea of you know, allowing hedgerows to become something, managed hedgerows to become something that's that really reflects the place and the species that exist in North America. So using the basic techniques, but then developing them for a kind of much more linked in practice that's developing sort of social ecological connections throughout North America, whether it depends on, you know, the biosphere, the bioregion that you're in, perhaps, or the local interest. So we've got some so thanks for the presenters this morning, for Jake and for Steve. We're now going to go into a panel, really. So if you have any questions that you want to ask, please pop them in the chat, and actually we'll probably just get you to come and ask rather than unmute everyone. But first I'd like to introduce Nigel Adams as our kind of as somebody who hasn't spoken this morning and is really intimately involved in this project as an advisor. Nigel, I hope you're still there and you haven't kind of sneaked off early.
Still here, Jim, if you can hear me. Yes.
Fantastic. That's really great. So Nigel, would you mind giving a little bit of introduction to yourself, and maybe, if you feel like it, reflecting on what you've heard this morning and your experience of being involved in the project, just while people get a chance to think about questions and maybe start popping them in the chat, please, if you have a question.
Yes, indeed. Well, I'm Nigel Adams, and I'm here today in Oxfordshire in England, rather a wet summer's day. And I guess I was brought up on a local farm, son of a farm manager, and then my early career was for conservation organisations such as the National Trust and the government organisation Natural England. That went on for quite a time, but about 20 years ago I became self-employed, doing a range of what I call countryside management tasks, and perhaps we can come back to this term management. I think it's an interesting one, isn't it, for the North American experience. But so I do a whole range of things. I've got 120 sheep of my own, a lot of hedge work, planting, lots and lots of hedge laying all the way through the winter, more and more management plans. You can imagine our country is covered in hedgerows. We've about 540,000 kilometres in the UK, but more and more farmers want to think about how they're managing their hedges, and I'm doing now a lot of management plans. In summer I teach things like scything and sheep shearing and things like that, so countryside management tasks really. So yeah, I'm trustee of the National Hedge Laying Society over here in Britain, and it's funny, I always think it's funny, my wife certainly thinks it's funny, if you become kind of specialist in something, you get to do lots of wonderful things. And so I've been to many hedge events in Germany, Denmark, Holland, France, and then Canada, and then America. And that, I think, it's absolutely wonderful to have, well, I feel it's wonderful for me to have a passion that takes me around the world almost, really. So a special hi to Steve, who was our host at Wellspring's farm there. And yeah, I suppose my experience of coming over to North America was fascinating. I'd looked up myself a bit of the history of hedgerows in North America. And they are out there. I know Jim's putting together a bit of a sort of collection of those things. And it's fascinating to see how they did develop on the East Coast and then sort of spread westwards to a degree. But I think what always fascinated me was this idea of management, because I guess North America essentially was, and we could discuss whether it, this is a true statement or not, was mostly kind of wilderness in a sense. And so the idea of planting something like a hedge, which in my terms, or European terms, needs lots of management, was an interesting one, really. Because I suppose what we're trying to achieve with our hedgerows is definitely the woodland edge effect. So imagine a natural forest and that edge, that gradated kind of hedge with lots of shrubby species in it. And that's where, to us, the biodiversity is. So we planted shrubs in a in a line to make a stock proof barrier through hedge laying. So every farm would have had every hedge laid periodically, because wire wasn't invented until, I don't know, 18th century or something. And so they were all laid, but we wanted that shrubby effect. We wanted to be able to have the coppicing regrowth off those shrubs, which you wouldn't get with a lot of mature tree species over here. So we're used to that concept of, I suppose, managing hedgerows, not only laying them, but then trimming them after laying. Because we would trim a hedge. We don't want to be laying a hedge too often, so we would trim it for quite a few years afterwards to keep it thick, to keep it dense. And then eventually, when nature sort of won the battle and started to go up, we would let it go up and then lay it again. So it is an interesting concept, I think, for you folk in North America to get a hang of that, in a sense, that management. Although it's up to you guys, I suppose, to develop your own system of managing hedges and your own styles, possibly, and dealing with the very nature of each of the woods. How when you work with trees, you get to know their personalities, almost what they do, whether do they grow together, bind together. That's an interesting thing. We have hornbeam over here that you tie it together, it grows together. We've done that a lot in Central Europe. So you're at the beginning of a journey, I suppose, finding out about all the species that you can use on all your many different regions across North America. And I think it's absolutely wonderful. I'm fascinated when I came over the 2 times to North America that people were immediately starting to think of the hedgerows as a stock-proof barrier, which is fantastic, because actually that takes us right back to why we use them here. And to be absolutely honest, not so many folk totally rely on them for stock-proof barriers here. We've got too used to wire fences, I guess, in many ways. So that's a great thing. I think that you're immediately thinking of them as stock-proof barriers, which is great. And Jake, I wanted to ask you a question, if I may. Were you thinking of them as stock-proof barriers? How did they integrate into your farming system?
Yeah, I think that is in our thinking for the long term, Nigel. It is going to take a little bit going from day one. I don't imagine we'll be able to have sheep in there as a full barrier for about 7 to 10 years. But ideally, we'd still be going and still have sheep to retain in the fields. And earlier it was mentioned about giving them like grazing or browsing, and that's to mix their diet with the grass and the tree leaves. It's excellent for their health. Absolutely
agree. Yes, indeed. Yes. So yes, good luck in North America with your hedges. But if there's anything else I can help with in terms of advice from the European perspective, then please do ask away.
Thanks, Nigel. And we've got a couple of questions.
Oh, you've died there, Jim.
Uh-oh. That rural Ontario internet.
Yeah.
It is a feckless beast. We could see what the questions were.
Yep.
We can keep going without Jim for a minute, our fearless leader. So the questions. Oh, okay. So that was a question about the willow actually keeping the sheep in. I can't speak to that. Could Steve talk about that? Steve, are you there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. See here. Yeah, I think. Where's the actual question? Sorry, I'm just.
It was about willow and if the willow can keep the sheep in.
Yeah, so the structure of the hedge and when it's laid creates a bit of a physical barrier. The resprout, which is mostly from the base of the cut willow, is loose, and that's certainly not providing any sort of barrier. It's the original the kind of original hedge that we laid, which is now mostly dying or dead wood, and then the stakes and the binders that were installed that really creates, I think, the physical barrier. And then Nigel, maybe you can add more, but the idea is that we then allow the new vegetation to grow up and then incorporate that into the fence to sort of keep the barrier bit going, right?
Yeah, so Steve, I think just clarify, perhaps people might be slightly confused if you say that the old stuff just died so quickly. We wouldn't, I'm not against willow, I think it's a wonderful experiment, but we wouldn't here put totally willow into a hedge because we know it's very attractive to eat. We would include things like thorn and, woody sort of structure stuff mixed in. And then once we've laid the hedge, we would keep it trimmed, because by trimming it, you're pruning it, you're almost replicating grazing in a sense, just by trimming it. And that forces out new growth to come along the hedge. The diagonals that we lay, which we call the pleachers, they're cut almost through, you know, probably 8/10 of the way through, sort of thing, you know. 8/10, is that a thing? Anyway, we're nearly all the way through, and new growth will come up from that cut stump. Now, unless you control that new growth slightly in the first years, then that will go upwards straight away. That will become the dominant growth, and the sap, the foods going into those diagonals that you laid, would slowly be cut off, because the plant's going, well, hey, we're the vertical ones now, we're going to be dominant, and off it goes. So if you want to have the longer, if you want to extend the time between this interventional hedge laying, then we would trim the hedge in the meantime. And you can do that with a willow hedge as well. And to a little bit, I'm sure you agree, Steve, that's being done by browsing, but of course they can't browse on top. So I would encourage you to trim the hedges, to slow down the process of you having to lay the hedge again. And that's why those diagonals died off, is the verticals took over. And with willow, you can imagine that being very, very dominant.
Just like to apologize. We had a power cut here. And I disappeared from the whole talk, and for a moment there I thought the whole thing had gone wrong, but that's why you make someone else co-host and a few people. So yeah, apologies about that. I hope you didn't miss anything crucial.
You missed some good jokes, I tell you.
At my expense, probably. Yeah. Fantastic. So that also means I have now lost the chat. So if there were any questions, that's a bit annoying. People might want to, if there's any.
We just talked a bit about one of the questions, Jim, which was about grazing and
Right.
on willow in particular. And then I just explained about how we might trim our hedges after laying, just to stop the vertical growth from becoming dominant. So that's that management element of it.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things, I know that Rob Reed had a question. And Rob, would you like to sort of nip in and say something about what you're doing as well? Because we've been in conversations about hedgerows, haven't we? So only if you want to, no pressure.
Yeah, sure. That's no problem. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Yeah, so I'm working on a hedgerow here. I live at Willow Creek Farm with my family. It's a 50-acre farm near Dutton, Ontario. And we've been working on a hedgerow. It's been sort of in my mind for many years. And we've lived on the farm now. This is our 5th year. And it's basically we were blessed with solid perimeter fences on the property, but there's interior features like a river valley, a creek valley, that were not protected from animals getting out. So I wanted, since we moved here, I've been thinking about where would a good place to be for a hedgerow be. And so we decided on the interior edge along the top of the valley to protect that in the long term from animals that sort of, if they got out of their pens, they would get down into that valley and cause ecological damage. So we wanted to sort of prevent that. Also, this feature will help in our site with erosion in the long term, because we have at the top of that valley, there's places where water rushes down. So so Jim was nice enough to help me with some consultation on that as well. I've managed to get some funding through ALUS and my local conservation authority, which is called Lower Thames Region Conservation Authority. And I've planted a lot of it this spring with some help from local folks here. Some family helped out with that. And the mix that we're doing is about 50 to 60% Osage orange, because it is intended as a stalk-proof fence. And then 10% each of hazel, chestnut, serviceberry, mulberry, and red osier dogwood. Then there's a bit of nanny berries put in as well. So that's the mix. And we were able to get in about, the total length is, I think it's around 300 meters. Let me just check. Yeah, about 350 meters long. So that's about just 1,100 feet long. And something I'll just mention, because I think it's a good sort of tidbit of information, is I ended up last year, as many farmers do, with some spoiled hay, like large round bales of spoiled hay. And so what I did was I rolled them out in the site where the hedge was going to go. So that prevented me, I don't have a tractor, so that allowed me to knock down the weeds really effectively. I put those down sort of late last summer and into the fall. And that allowed the space to be almost weed free by the spring. I had to reapply in a few places. And that just gave us a really good head start on the weeds. We'll still have to weed it, obviously, but that was just sort of a little tidbit I'll share. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. That's brilliant, and it's great to be working with you. And I would encourage anyone else to in your position, really, to just get in touch with me or someone else. But I'd be happy to talk to you about hedge planting and to do your own advice. But just do it. Just have a go and choose the plants that you would like and see what you can do. I'm seeing some questions here, which are great. Hopefully, so there's one question. I'm not sure who that comes from. Steve has just posted them into the chat for me, which is, could you talk more on the Osage orange hedges you mentioned? I've been considering using this here in Texas as a barrier for an orchard area for deer. I saw one of your photos had a deer fence. Is this something you'll need for many years inside the hedge until it grows up? Is just left there as the hedge grows? I'm curious on the development timeline. So as you probably heard, Rob mentioned Osage orange, which does sound like it's a great idea as a kind of, when we're planting hedgerows as to use as natural barriers, it's really great to have as a large part of the hedgerow some kind of thorny shrub. And we, in England, it's hawthorn that's planted as maybe about 50%, sometimes 100% of the hedgerow. But if you're looking at kind of increasing diversity, I would encourage you to think about 40-50%, and then add in other species. But Osage orange, I'm not sure about Texas. We'd have to look into, you'd have to look into that, whether it's a local native plant. But certainly we have, certainly it's been used effectively in Osage, in hedgerows for hundreds of years. And yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how these projects using Osage orange at places like Rob's, how effective they'll be. So we could plant those and monitor them. In terms of fencing, this is a really important topic. First of all, I would say don't have your fence inside the hedge. That would be first off as a problem for ongoing management and cutting. So what commonly happens is, and what I think Jake is doing at Topsy, and Rob probably as well, is that for the first initial few years, if you have high deer pressure or browse pressure on some of these young hedgerows, that you will probably need to fence these off, at least initially. But it really does depend, and it's up to you to know what your kind of local issues are around that. Does anyone else from our expert panel, Steve, Nigel, Jake, want to comment on that?
I am fascinated.
Yeah, the deer and the voles are the things we're worried about the most. Obviously the sheep, but then it's sort of like keep them protected from the base with the little tree guard things. Does anyone have a better solution for vole protection than those ugly little white plastic tree guards? We tried to purchase wool tree guards that are being manufactured in England, but our order was canceled because the manufacturer stopped making them. But that was our hope, to get tree guards from wool. But does anyone have anything better than those ugly little plastic ones?
Short answer, probably no, unless anyone else is. I would say that, we've had some vole. Yeah, we've had some vole problems, but the other thing is that with the density of planting for these hedgerows, you're kind of you really are combating to a certain extent that kind of pressure. You know, we have lost, and I'll publish these figures at some point, but you know, the majority of plants that we've lost haven't been due to vole pressure, but you know, it will depend. I thought you were going to say, Jake, not wool, but we've looked at purchasing some wolves.
No.
So increasing the predation pressure might be useful.
You know,
get some trained moles.
Can I talk to that just for 1 second? Because it didn't come up in the presentation. I'm interested in Steve's thoughts as well. But our goal is, by increasing the biodiversity and by giving the rabbits and the voles a safe place, that the coyotes are going to have more food and have less interest in coming in and killing the sheep. So I'm just wondering, from a farm and especially sheep management standpoint, if there are any thoughts on that, or if there is any numbers or studies to back that up one way or the other.
And that was for Steve.
Yeah, for anybody. But has anyone found this correlation?
I just know it's so hard, because I think the dynamics of predators and pests are so site specific. So we haven't ever had a major vole issue, but part of that too is when we're planting trees, we're really conscious about keeping things mowed, especially pre-winter, and making sure our pastures are clipped really short before winter, and those sort of things, basically decreasing habitat. But I think you're onto something in general. When we add tree diversity and hedgerows and all these things, we see this massive increase in sort of wildlife interest in coming into the pasture. So we know there's been more fox dens around the edges of our pasture since we started doing agroforestry than when it was open field, because we see them and visit them and they come back every year. So it's hard to track those. I think it's hard to track those impacts, and they're so site specific, but I think it's part of, I think there's sort of a tiered approach to protecting trees, which is definitely physical barriers. We for voles or small rodents, we have actually more problems sometimes with mice girdling trees. Just cutting up hardware cloth into little cylinders and burying that partially in the ground as you plant the tree. Maybe a tube, maybe some fencing if deer pressure is high. You know, for us, having presence of grazing animals and electric fence and dogs seem to keep the deer. They've kind of shifted a bit to how they interact with plants and sort of plantings. But one thing I always encourage people, no matter what you're planting in terms of trees, is really to think about what scale of planting are you able to not only plant, but adequately maintain for the first 3 years of their growth. Because I think it's easy sometimes to say, well, I'm going to plant 200 trees and then I'm going to plant 200 trees the next year. But that really means you need to take care of 400 trees. So you need to have the adequate mulch layer, animal, predator protection, all those kind of things, because really those first 3 years are when the trees are getting established, and then you can back off a bit. So just keep that in mind when you're in the winter and you get all your tree catalogs and you think, yeah, 600 trees sounds easy. It's much different reality. So we've really tempered ourselves and tried to really focus on that.
Yeah, thanks. I would reiterate that it really does. We are trying here to have a really low hands-off approach to the hedgerows, but you really need to, in the first few years, you need to pay attention to establishment. We've found as well water scarcity being a real problem at the moment. Luckily today it's just drenched everywhere, which is fantastic. But especially on more sandy soils, on slopes, one of our hedgerows is really not doing too well because it's positioned like that, and we don't have a kind of water source very near to it. So it's really arduous to be able to get water to that place. But some of the plants are taking off, which are great. Just for some other questions, are you aware of any hedgerow activity in the Pacific Northwest? Not explicitly, certainly not in terms of managed hedgerows, but there are two things that I can put people onto. The first is the Delta Farmland Trust on the Fraser River. who planted hedgerows and have hedgerows as part of their management, habitat management. Now, it was it was the place that you remember I mentioned earlier on, Sue Orezhin's studies of the differences between hedgerows in Canada, in North America, and in the UK. That was her study site where she was looking at hedgerows there. So there has been some hedgerow activity going on there. I haven't been able to get in touch with anyone or had any interest coming out from there in terms of managed hedgerows. However, I also know that another one of our English hedge laying friends who was hopefully going to be here today, whose name is Russell Woodham, the Dorset hedge layer, for those of you who know him on Facebook, is also very supportive of this project. He has friends out there and was originally going to do some, looking to come out and do some management workshops, hedge laying workshops out on that coast. And all I would say is, you know, we've been limited really by where we can go and what we can do by the pandemic. And I think we'd all rather hope that after the 2019 workshops that this would lead on to a lot more workshops, but we haven't been able to do that. So fingers crossed we will be able to get out and do some hedge laying workshops in different locations. So the idea that I'm interested in is training trainers. So we just need to find people who are interested in learning about hedge laying and train you up, you know, in terms of, so we have people who are learning about this kind of new skill, if you like, new to North America anyway. So that will happen. It's just we have to wait for a little while. Yeah, please do, while I look at some more.
I can't remember the name of the island, but a young chap came over from one of the Northwest islands there and learned hedge laying, worked with me for a couple of months, and he's still out there, not necessarily hedge laying, but I can put you in touch with him, the gentleman, the person who's inquiring from Northwest there. I can't remember the name of the island, but he's a very good hedge layer. Lopez, I think it was Lopez Island. I've just seen a note down the bottom there. Yeah, it was Lopez, yes.
Excellent. Well, it would be really good, yeah, if we could get hold of his name as well.
I'm reading the messages as you speak, and it is indeed Lucas. Somebody knows Lucas. Well done. He's a great edge layer. In fact, he came second in a novice class at a local competition.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's excellent. So we have a question here for Steve. You hit on something that I've considered on management of hedges. You talked about the hedge growing out of the range of the sheep, giving them the ability to keep upper leaves. Can you just talk on managing hedges in conjunction with grasses and other plants? The complexity has me wondering, how do you manage different plants' responses to grazing?
Start me off, Jim.
This is the plight of the grazer, which is, it's a constant, ever evolving, ever dynamic piece, is the question of how to manage vegetation. So overall, last year, we were pruning and clipping and dropping trees for the animals mostly. And this year, we're just trying to keep the forages at bay by doing a lot of extra mowing, because basically last year was one of the driest years we've had, and this year was one of the wettest years we've had. And I do think that with woody vegetation that sort of, and Nigel's given me some homework already. I need to trim my willow hedge a bit more to keep keep it at bay. So I think there's a balance to be struck where I want to make sure that, you know, a third to a half of the vegetation is out of the reach of the sheep, but also the residency of the sheep is short enough so that we're not overgrazing. So it's I think with woody vegetation, it's the same concept as with pasture. You have to ask yourself, when are you grazing and when are you overgrazing? And the timing between that can be minutes or hours. So we always try to have our next paddock set up so we can make that decision based on the ecology and not based on our schedule. And so, and I'll say we've done tree fodder research on our farm, and one of the big questions is how we can sustainably manage woody vegetation. What is the rest and recovery period for different plants? We don't really have that information at hand. So it's a bit of trial and error at this point and observation to see. And the nice thing about using so-called invasive plants or undesirable vegetation is the stakes feel a lot lower when you feed them to animals. So you can kind of play with it a bit more versus if I was spending my time planting a bunch of nice choice deciduous hardwoods, I would be much more protective of them. So yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Steve. Who is the smallholder in Northeast Kansas? Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question rather than me read it out?
Hi, my name's Julia.
Hi, Julia.
Hi, so we did a dense planting in 2018 using trees and bushes from the Forestry Service. So we planted elderberry, northern spice bush, sandhill plum, which is the same as Chickasaw plum, American plum, and it's growing pretty good. It's just, you know, it was designed as a windbreak, and it got, you know, we fenced it off. It's a good wildlife corridor, but we're, you know, I'm just interested in hedgerows in general and maybe potentially laying it, but I just don't know if they're the right types of plants or trees. It really, I think, you know, the height on those particular like small trees and bushes is probably, you know, between 5 to 15 feet. So I don't know if there's specific types, you know, should they be taller? Should I interplant something else?
Wonderful. Thank you. Would anyone like to chip in? Nigel?
Well, it sounds as if you're on the right course there. I mean, anything, and I think any species in the world would be the same, that if the species coppices, or if you make a cut in it and it resprouts, then that has the ability to be laid. Obviously conifers, most conifers perhaps, you couldn't do that because it wouldn't grow from the stem. But any small shrubs that could grow from a cut stump are there ready to be laid in the future. Going back a quick question, you know, we keep talking about willow, and I know the advantages of them eating a certain amount of willow, good for the digestion, etc. But you know, it's no coincidence that over here in Europe, our main stock-proof plant, we've always planted hawthorn, which is very, very thorny. You've probably got even thornier species over there. So if you want a stock-proof fence, you've got to start thinking about these thorny things so that you can have stock near them for longer. You know, yes, you've always got to keep an eye on whether your stock are eating the hedge, but you don't want to be doing that every 3 hours kind of thing. So there's a balance between getting that thorniness, that protectiveness that the species provides itself, and that would help you set your grazing patterns. But the lady that just was on, I think it's great that you planted lots of different species, and yes, anything between, I guess, 10 and 15 feet, maybe up to 4 inches in diameter, and lots of them, so they're no more than perhaps 1 foot or so, 1.5 feet apart. Sounds perfect for hedge laying.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Julia, for your question. And do send me some pictures, and we can get a conversation going. Be really cool.
Awesome. Thanks.
Okay. I have a question here, and I think it's from Brad Kick in Northern Michigan. Is that you, about the hedge laying workshop?
It is. Yep. And my internet connection's terrible, so maybe I'll just have you read it.
Oh, okay. But nice to see you, and thanks for turning up. And yes, that's right. Brad and I were trying to plan a hedge laying workshop before the pandemic over in Northern Michigan. But we couldn't find a hedge ready to lay. And this is, you know, Nigel and I, when we came over in 2016 and again in 2019, were scratching our head at this because we were promised some hedgerows here, and to find out that we didn't have anything particularly good to lay was a source of consternation and fear. I would say large amounts of fear, wouldn't you, Nigel?
Well, I think I should just describe our first arrival there. We were led across Mount Wall Farm there, walked and walked, and I thought, well, in a minute we're going to come to a hedge, and we walked into the middle of a forest, and I think it was she that turned left and turned right and looked through the forest and said, "So what about that then?" Do you remember?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
No. Yeah.
Yes, I do, and it is a problem and is an issue. But having said that, it does lead us to this this issue that does lead us to problem solving, because, you know, in the end, what hedge laying, I think, at the root of hedge laying originally was this idea of problem solving. So, you know, back in the day when a farmer may have looked at the the boundary of his field, which was probably left over from forest clearance, and he wanted to make a stock-proof barrier, he would have done what he had to do with the plants. He wouldn't have necessarily planted them. So, and I think we're in the same boat as those early farmers, and that's why I feel a little bit proud about what we've done, Nigel, in terms of managing some of these hedgerows. And the one at Topsy Farm as well is a case in point, because looking at that hedgerow, it's about only 30% living. I have to say, it was a lot of effort to go about actually, cutting down stems from out of the line of the hedgerow and putting them in the hedgerow and burying them and stuff. And of course they won't grow. So it's a dead hedge with living plants in it. So it's not out of the realms of possibility that if you want to have a kind of dead hedge that looks like a kind of living laid hedge, to begin with, as an aesthetic proposition of this, and that's what we did at Topsy Farm, was people can come along and they can see what could be there or what will be there in 7 years or something like that. So Brad,
Jim, can I just jump on that just for a second?
Sure.
Because I did take some pictures yesterday, but I didn't get them into the slide. That and what Jim's talking about is that the hawthorn hedge, where it was basically just a clump of trees, more or less in a jagged line, and you and Sarah pleached. That's the correct term, right? Where you cut part of the way through and laid it down.
That's it.
So there were, maybe a dozen pleached hawthorns, and then the rest you took dead ones and stuck them into the ground. But that the growth that has come through, it looks like they are all living. It's incredible. And there's some grapevine that has come up through it, and all the sumac that were already just sort of in the ground have come to life. We planted some conifers, maybe 10 feet away from that, downwind. So they are now getting the benefit of wind protection, but full sun. It's incredible. It's incredible to see how much new growth and new life came from what you just termed as a dead hedge, but it's the opposite. It's a new ecosystem.
And that's wonderful to hear, Jake. Thank you. And I think, bearing in mind that that one of the processes of hedge growth has often been, we talk about this idea of a fence row. Birds sit on fence rows and they defecate, and seeds grow in the protection of these hedges, these dead hedges. So, you are going to contribute to biodiversity, and you are going to end up with something living in the shadow of that hedgerow.
Nigel was asking earlier about whether we could have the hedges as sheep barriers, or if that was the goal. And if we had hawthorns at the edge of every field, we'd never need wire again, because those thorns are bastards. Nobody wants those thorns. How's your finger?
Oh, there's plenty in there. I'm digging them out all the time, I tell you.
It's actually, interestingly, it's actually really difficult to get hold of hawthorns in Canada in terms of for plants, and it's something that I really want to address here.
Hook you up, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. We really need to look into that. There was some issue, I know, from early plantings in the 1700s and 1800s. There was some issue around apple rust, certainly with the imported hawthorns. And I don't know, maybe Steve Gabriel can talk about that, whether that's still a problem with hawthorns, which may mean that if you plant them in big plots like in hedgerows, that could become problematic. But I just want to get back quickly to Brad's question about how we can have a hedge laying workshop in a place that doesn't have a planted hedgerow. I think we were starting to look at the possibilities of woodland edges, like we've done at Mount Wolf Forest Farm and also at Wellspring Forest Farm. But the other thing would be, if we can't do it now, as you can see from Steve's video, is planting willow. You know, for quick growth into a sort of willow hedge. You know, it will still take a good few years, but it will be faster than planting a mixed species rich hedgerow. Yeah, even if we can get some kind of forest edge that we can do some dead hedge work on, would be really useful. So we'll continue. Yeah.
Sorry, no, Erin's just written a couple of points there that they were planting. I did some hedge planting by clearing dead wood and then protecting the new hedge by the dead wood. And I can't remember it, but there's a German guy did some work where he just literally made, do you remember this, Jim? Big, you know, thick, dense rows of dead wood, and up through them came naturally seeded hedgerows effectively. And it does strike me sometimes, both your place in Canada and Steve's to a degree, was sort of secondary woodland in a sense that had taken over old agricultural fields, I think I'm right in saying. And that, you know, you almost have the opportunity there to, I'm just looking behind you, the picture you've got behind you, Jim, to create your fence line through some of this secondary woodland and use the timber at the side, felling it, making your dead hedge, thus giving it light as well. Do you see what I mean? Creating like a ride, as we would call it in Europe, planting your hedge or protecting it by the dead hedge. That you've got a classic opportunity there of deadwood quite near, haven't you, to do that work in North America?
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely, that's something that we can look at. And you know, one of the things that we need to keep getting back to is the idea that you know, the interest here is about hedgerows, you know, in all their forms. It just happens that at the moment we from my project at least are looking at these managed hedgerows as a way of you know, for all the different services that they provide. But you know, there are different ways of making these so-called dead hedgerows that can be useful as a kind of nursery space for as Nigel says, for new plants to grow up in. So yeah, if anyone wants to talk about having a hedgerow workshop near them, and just following up on some of the conversations around the West Coast as well, and seeing that Brendan was talking about Lucas, who is this Nigel's hedge laying friend, and you're also spoon carving. So that's really great as well, because we do spoon carving. We have an annual spoon moot, it's called, over here at Mount Wolf Farm, where we had about 25 people in the first year. So that's all a good connection as well. So I'm just trying to read any more of these questions. I know we're coming up to the last. Okay, I think we've mostly got through those questions. So I just wanted to spend just the last 10 minutes really on talking about the North American Hedgerow Society. Let's go stick that slide up again. So hopefully by signing up for this webinar today, you will have found the North American Hedgerow Society with its provisional logo that I botched up on on the computer, which I hope you all like, but it doesn't have to stay. Nigel pointed out that even putting a bill hook on is a bit presumptuous, because maybe North American hedge layers want to, I don't know, tame beavers or something like that to use in hedge laying. But anyway, so the North American Hedgerow Society came out of the workshops that we did in 2019 with a remit to look at providing information, providing consultancy, to create community around hedgerows and the management of hedgerows. So this exists for you now, really. And you know, at the moment we have a website. We have and the website has information about hedgerow history and culture, or it will do anyway. It has some information, or will do soon, about hedgerow planting and hedgerow management. I'm really interested in developing these kind of resources around hedge plants. You know, what works well, in what locations and where. So, you know, eventually I will put my Excel spreadsheet that you saw up there, or thinking of any other way we can share this information. At the moment, you know, I'm looking for other places to get involved with hedgerow planting, because, you know, we're complaining at the moment about having nothing to lay, so we need to plant stuff. So it's a kind of urgency, really. And I would encourage people just to not worry too much and just try things, see what happens. I can advise you, or you can find information on the web. It doesn't have to come from me, about how to plant, you know, in terms of the technical side of things. And, you know, whether you want to be a demonstration farm, or you've got a small holding, or even in urban and public areas, you know, getting volunteers involved and people involved is a real key thing for me and my project, I guess. We'll have events. We will have events as soon as we can, and hopefully we'll get Nigel and maybe other people back to do some training as well. And there will eventually become resources on the website with links and book recommendations as well, and hopefully a shop. I spelt that really badly. One of the things that I aim to do when I went back to England on occasion, which I haven't done, is bring some bill hooks over that people could buy. But I also started working with a local blacksmith. So working with the idea about, you know, local North American blacksmiths having a plan for what makes a good bill hook, and then forging them. And this is one of the ways we can look at kind of the regional development of bill hooks, you know, what works in different areas. I'm currently working on a hedge laying guide. It's going to be a really basic one for North America. I have an artist friend who is also a spoon carver and crafter who lives in Pennsylvania, who is going to illustrate it for me. So this will be a hedge laying, a very basic guide to some of the basics of how to hedge lay, and it will be available through the website. And I'm hopefully going to look to crowdfund for funds for that going forward. So the question is, I'd like to hear from all of you out there, what else you would like to have from the North American Hedgerow Society. How can we help you plant hedgerows, build your skills, start separate areas off in North America? Because, you know, in the best will in the world, I can't and don't want to get everywhere. I'd like lots of regional hotspots to spring up. So you know, how can we help you out there build these local networks? So at the moment, I guess I'm the best person to sort of coordinate this. So please feel free to email me. You can find my email on the website, and I'll continue to coordinate this and continue to create meetings like this. So we'll have another webinar maybe in the autumn once people are starting to go out and think and see and having a look at their local woodland, and thinking, this will be good. I'm hoping to have some hedge laying workshops starting up in the autumn as well. They'll be up here in Toronto. But if we do manage to start getting the ability to move about a bit more, then I'd be very much welcome. I'd very much look towards you know, working with people to start up some workshops in other places. I'll send out a questionnaire to everyone, and if you can, and that will have a box. Rather than asking everyone now, we might have a few ideas come forward, but if you can fill that in and say what you want to see from the North American Hedgerow Society, that would be awesome. So let's just stop that share. It's now 11:56. In the last few minutes, does anyone have any initial ideas for or wants to comment on the North American Hedgerow Society? I've just seen that message from Erin. Oh, it's a direct message. So yeah, 3 hours north of Waterloo. Let's talk, Erin. Yeah, definitely. We'll have let's get going. Any thoughts?
Are there ways to get like you have the University of Waterloo involved in this? You were going to talk about that. Would this be a good opportunity to mention that, and maybe to get that academic and government and private sponsors and corporate sponsors all working together?
Yeah, it's a good point actually, Jake, and you know, that was always part of the work of the hedge laying in the Ontario Landscape Project. Initially, you know, we had some consultations, and we'll have to revisit that with the local conservation authority. It's certainly in Canada, in Toronto, the TRCA, and also the local municipality here, which was the town of Caledon. It's one of those things that's, I think, is going to be a little bit of a slow growing project, and to keep pestering people. And as more things like this webinar that had nearly 50 people attend, and you know, conversations at the North American Agroforestry Conference, and for people like myself and Steve, and to keep plugging away through our academic circles. So I'm at the University of Waterloo doing my PhD in rural livelihoods, rural skills and livelihoods. And so I've just started, and I will be putting a funding bid together to sort of focus on hedgerow planting and the establishment of more sort of livelihoods like the Hedgerow Co. You know, so it'd be great if there are other people out there who see if you think about hedge laying as a livelihood and how it connects in with other things like coppicing, like the blacksmiths, you know, these kind of localized, small scale. So I'm looking politically and at a political economy that is really in line. If anyone's read or if anyone has access to, I've forgotten the book now, A Small Farm Future by Chris Smage, who's an English sociologist and farmer, who his book A Small Farm Future is really very popular at the moment amongst people thinking about, and you don't necessarily have to ascribe to this to be in this hedge laying community, but we are looking at you know, degrowing economies and making them much more localized, and you know, looking towards skill sets that can be used in a much less complex society in the future. And you know, we need to experiment in lots of different ways going forward in the future, and some may say that technology is going to save us and continuing to grow the economy and things like that, but my view is my research interest is through these small farm futures. So yeah, so we'll be hoping to look to work with other institutions going forward, and I'm constantly on the lookout for more academic and government partners to go forward with this. So if anyone has any contacts, or if anyone would like to work with me or with the group, I'd be I'd look forward to hearing from them.
And from Topsy's perspective, we are very much engaged in trying to rebrand farmers as ecologists, and to encourage that. And one of the unexpected benefits and outcomes of doing this work is we now, and speaking personally, like, I think more about the trees and the interaction between the trees and the farm and nature in general, now that we are going to the work of planting and caretaking. It is a wonderful and tangible benefit of doing the work, is that you think more about it. And I would love for farmers to be seen by the general population not as world destroyers or ecology destroyers, but as saviors of biodiversity.
Yeah, I think that's right, Jake, and I think you know, I'd encourage you to read Chris's book as well. I think you'd love it, in terms of how the idea of farming and food as being the place where we start to rethink our society, and hedges fit into that because they are a way of connecting people, and hedge laying is a way of connecting people to the landscape. Okay, so I think it is now 12, and as much as 12 on the east coast of North America, and as much as I'd like to continue this conversation, we should wrap it up. Because Nigel will be hurrying off to the football very soon, and I would not want him to miss that. So thank you to everyone for coming along today. This has been recorded, or at least It's been recorded in part because I forgot to press start at the beginning. So I will fill in the gaps. We just missed my presentation and a bit of Jake's, but luckily we've got his video. So we've got all the good stuff, this conversation. I hope everyone here is happy to continue to be on the North American Hedgerow Society mailing list. Consider yourselves part of that organization as we go forward. We might ask in the future for subscriptions. I don't know. I don't know how it's going to look at the moment, but we'll see. And I look forward to talking with you in the future and for promoting hedgerows and this hedgerow landscapes in North America. But for the time being, thank you so much to the speakers today. Thanks to Jake. And thanks to Steve, and thanks Nigel for tuning in as well. It's been really great, as usual, as always, to have you involved in these conversations, and look forward to getting you back to North America.
Thanks, Jim. I just wanted to wish everybody well with your society. And I've been desperately trying to remember the quote from George Washington when he wrote to his estate in Virginia, I believe it was, where he said, "Go out and plant hedgerows with great expediency," because he was mad about them. So that's my biggest piece of advice. Just go and plant hedges.
Yeah. I reiterate that. Plant, have a go at hedge laying and just see what happens. Great stuff. Okay, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. Have the great rest of your day and great rest of the week, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now. Take care.
Bye-bye.